She walked out of our living room with a suitcase and a smile that belonged more to a headline than a goodbye. 10 months later, she double-tapped a photo of me standing on a volcano in Guatemala with a woman who'd sat up with me through midnight bugs and career meltdowns. She didn't know our laughter then. She didn't remember how I fixed her slow laptop at 3 in the morning. She only remembered how I once failed to show up for a protest she thought mattered. Want the rest? Stick with me. This is a story about what we lose when we confuse being right with being kind. When Olivia said it, "Let's just be friends," everything in me did the polite, predictable things people's heads do when someone hands them a choice they're not expecting. I blinked. I tried to locate a joke. 2 years is a long enough time for habits to calcify and small rituals to feel like family, but not long enough to have an instant script for evaporating them. I'd pictured other endings, messy scenes, cinematic declarations, maybe a slow cool down, but not this abrupt, civil severing. "Sure," I said. My voice was even, like I'd practiced saying it in the shower. It came from a corner of me that had, for months, been quietly preparing for this by apologizing to things I didn't understand. She folded her hands, said, "I just think I need space to figure some things out," and that was all. She kissed my forehead like we were sealing a book closed, and then she left. She took with her the small things. The mismatched mugs we'd accumulated. The toothbrush she had prized for its softness. The little sticky note I'd found in the junk drawer that said, "Don't forget to call Mom." We were 34 and 32, respectively. I'm Daniel Cruz, software product manager, $135,000 salary, steady, not flashy, who lived in a 2-bed loft on the Lower East Side. Olivia Hart was a 34-year-old community organizer and grant strategist making somewhere around $78,000. She was passionate in a way that made rooms hold their breath. The kind of person who could cite a citation and make it feel like a verb. We met, as some modern couples do, at a public meeting about park funding. She had a soundbite and a scowl that looked like policy being chewed to a fine point. I had a goofy flyer for a volunteer audit team I'd made with a free design template. She laughed so hard at the flyer that she followed me to coffee. On paper, our connection was a steady convergence. She pushed, I steadied. She loved the front lines, town halls, petitions, witness testimony, and I loved the architecture behind making those things work. Data, timelines, community coordination. She taught me to interrogate the systems that shape the world. I taught her how to make a spreadsheet that could show donors the impact of a $10,000 grant in a single chart. At first the partnership felt like a duet. She curated the cadence of outrage, and I made sure our small house had clean socks and a dinner plan. But there is a thin seam between principled urgency and an impatience that insists small things are trivial. Olivia's conviction grew like a vine, necessary and beautiful at first, then insistent, then strangling. She wanted people to align perfectly with the ideas she held. A misplaced pronoun, an awkwardly worded op-ed headline, or a tweet without proper context could become, in her view, an affront. She corrected strangers on the subway and, worse, began to correct me at parties. On the way I ordered coffee. On the way I framed a community partnership. On the way I cared. There were times she was tender, sitting with me at 3 a.m. when my sister had been in the hospital, and times she turned tenderness into a pedagogy, as if love were always a proposition to be improved. I tried to keep up. I read articles she suggested, went with her to volunteer nights, and learned the vocabulary that made her feel at home. Friends noted it. Marcus, my best friend from college, would say, half joking, "Dude, you got a PhD in activism from Olivia U." I didn't mind. The thing was, I liked it for a while. I wanted to be the better version of myself. I liked being nudged. But over time, the nudges became demands. Not for my growth, necessarily, but toward a version of me she could hold up as a living example. Sometimes praise felt performative. Look at Daniel, he did X. Sometimes correction felt public. Then came the series of small humiliations that stack and harden. At a neighborhood fundraiser, she introduced me as the man who keeps the home while I do the work, and laughed. The laughter was warm. The introduction meant well, but the phrasing made me feel like an accessory on a shelf of virtue. At a friend's wedding, she corrected a to-be-announced speaker in front of our table and later told me, sternly, that I should know better about certain phrasing. At the end of a week where I'd stayed up fixing a critical deployment outage at work, she posted a congratulatory photo of the team that included me as a shadow in the background. Uncredited, unnamed. The internet loved the caption, "Community needs quiet labor," but the private labor felt invisible. The third month after she said, "Let's just be friends," I started traveling for work more than before. My company won a contract that involved field research and user interviews in Latin America. I was given the opportunity to lead a small team that would go abroad for 3 weeks at a time. It was the kind of thing that, 3 years earlier, would have excited both of us. A chance to work on a product that could reduce waste in municipal services. Olivia, however, had been tightening into a shell. She said the timing was complicated. She had deadlines, a new advocacy piece to push, a panel to moderate. That was fine, she said supportively, you should go. It's good for your growth. I booked the trip and took 2 people from my team. Naomi, a UI designer with an infectious laugh and a curiosity that made interviews sing. And Leah, a program manager who could smooth a tense conversation into actionable notes. Both women were friends I'd grown close to through the long nights of product launches. They were brilliant and kind in a way that didn't require validating my masculinity. If anything, their support was the kind that asked nothing of me beyond showing up. We went to Guatemala first. The workdays were intense. Interviews, field testing, night edits. Nights were quieter. Dinner at a tiny family-run restaurant. Local beer. Conversations that followed afternoon exhaustion into philosophical debates about belonging and code. Naomi and Leah joked that I'd become a magnet for high-calorie street food. One evening, a volcano tour was arranged to celebrate the completion of a pilot. Standing on the rim, the city stretched below, and we took a photo. Me grinning, Naomi bouncing like a kid on the edge, Leah leaning into the frame. It was a small victory, a product shipped, a pilot complete. I posted a photo slowly, the kind of post that said, "Work was good. We learned a lot." I thanked the team, tagged Naomi, tagged Leah. Olivia saw the post. She double-tapped. It didn't seem like a big thing, just a polite engagement. A few weeks later she liked another photo from the trip. Me standing by a salt flat in Bolivia. An image Naomi had captured as the sun flattened like paper. That, too, looked like a small kindness. But she began to watch these trips differently. In her timeline, my travels were not mere updates. They became a narrative she could place herself against. She would see me laughing with other women. And instead of seeing colleagues, she saw a story being told without her. I didn't know she was watching like that until the night she texted a photograph of her and a friend. A candid, dimly lit image, with the caption, "Hard nights." I asked if she was okay. She replied, "I'm fine." There was a sting, like the echo of a phrase struck against a glass. That's the particular cruelty of the modern era. Jealousy is pixelated. You can construct a narrative out of moments. Olivia began to narrate from afar. Her posts, once public campaigns and field notes, turned private in tone. She started to write long Facebook posts about abandonment in movement work, the loneliness of having to hold public space, the luxury of travel. She didn't name me. She never publicly accused me of betrayal. She didn't have to. The picture she painted was of a partner who was present in words but absent in the small attentions she desired. Naomi and Leah kept being themselves, generous, professional, and utterly uninterested in drama. They were the women who sat through late hours debugging with me and said, "Okay, what's our next step?" They weren't the women who never doubted me because of loyalty to me personally. They supported the work and trusted me as a teammate. Later, when the romance rumor mill churned, because people love a tidy arc involving travel, a handsome man, and benevolent women, I would have to spend time correcting assumptions, clarifying the nature of professional intimacy. That cleaned up with time, but it wasn't immediate. Meanwhile, Olivia wrote an essay, one that started with the line, "My partner is away, and the city is louder for it." It didn't mention names. It was picked up by a small online journal and shared among our mutual friends. The tone was elegiac, bitter, and raw. A few friends messaged me, "Are you okay?" I was. I was also tired of living in a narrative that did not fit me. We tried to talk once, months after the separation. We met at a coffee shop that smelled like citrus and a carefully curated playlist. She looked, as always, immaculate in her way, but there was a wear to her that did not sit well with the armor she sometimes wore. We spoke like reasonable people. "Why did you leave?" I asked, not to reopen a wound but to understand the coordinates of the fracture. She hesitated. "You were always changeable," she said. "You said you wanted to be at my side. But sometimes I felt like I had to drag you into the things I loved. I felt alone doing the work." There was truth there. I had failed sometimes to prioritize the things she valued as she wanted them prioritized. I had missed events. I had thought scheduling conflicts were benign. But there was also a tone, a way she made me the problem. Rather than admitting the dance we both performed poorly. "I wanted to support you," I said. "I did. In my way. I cleaned. I cooked. I listened." I mentioned Naomi and Leah not as a defense but as context. Professional bonds are not romantic by default. She listened. She said, softly, "I saw you laughing with them on trips. I watched you do the thing I thought we'd do together. It felt like quicksand." The conversation ended without fireworks. We parted with something like a truce. Later that night she posted a quote about commitment and then, uncharacteristically, put up a photo of us from years earlier. Happier, less precise, with the caption, "What we choose is who we become." I liked the photo. She did not comment on my status. She did not ask about my trip to Bolivia. A year passed and the world turned. My job kept me traveling sporadically. Naomi and Leah became lifelong friends and professional confidants. We had a ritual now. When a trip landed, we'd plan the work, discuss the interviews, and hope for good data. Between trips, we were in the office, attending stand-ups, mentoring junior engineers, and occasionally cooking for each other late at night when deadlines were tight. I built a life that was steady and full of small joys. Olivia, in her orbit, continued to gain traction. She moved across boroughs, took a senior role at another nonprofit, and spoke at more panels. The public success, however, didn't perfectly map onto private contentment. I'd hear through friends, Maya, a mutual organizer, how Olivia sometimes cried late into the night about loneliness. How a hotel room felt less like rent and more like an accusation. I felt crestfallen, but not pleased. Regret is not a game you want to win. Then came the day she reached out in earnest. Not through a long essay or a clarifying post but directly. Via email. It was a letter of sorts, reflective, less performative than her usual cadence. She wrote that she had watched my trips and felt a sting. She wrote that she regretted 1,000 things. The jokes, the corrections, the times she made me feel like a project instead of a person. The paragraph that followed confessed that she had used righteousness as a shield. She admitted missing the small habits. The way I'd brew tea at midnight when neither of us woke. The drawer where I kept extra cables. The ritual I made of making sure we had a clean towel after long runs of heat waves in summer. Her regret landed like a pebble in still water. There were concentric circles, waves that reached me but could not reach back the same way. Her letter did not ask to return. It seemed, instead, to be a ledger balanced towards humility. She closed by saying, "I'm sorry for making you small in the name of being big. I'm learning to be kinder. I hope you are well." I was. And I was not. I opened the message at midnight after a long day of interviews and felt both a familiar ache and an unfamiliar closure. I replied, honest and unornamented, "Thank you. I appreciate this. I forgive you. I hope you find the tenderness you're seeking, because you deserve it." It felt true and it felt empty and it felt everything in between. Months later, at a rooftop after a product launch, Naomi and Leah and I sat watching the sunset. Laughter rose. Conversation moved from career notes to cooking hacks to the smallness of being human. Leah mentioned an organizer she'd met in a community co-op who was, frankly, brilliant and a little radical in that unself-conscious way you either love or find scary. Naomi rolled her eyes and said, "Sounds like someone I follow on Twitter." In that moment the future felt wide. I started dating again when I met Nora, a curator at a gallery, at a friend's show. She was a patient listener with an eye for the strange and the wonderful. She asked good questions and answered better ones. With her, the quotidian returned like a welcome rain. Grocery lists, mismatched socks, sending each other links to songs that made us think of dumb moments. She had her own politics. A different color of activism. More about representation in cultural institutions than community organizing. And she never pressured me into an ideology. She loved that I enjoyed tinkering with the vacuums in our apartment. I loved that she folded our napkins in a way that made me smile. Olivia saw some of this. Some photos. Some mutual friends. But she also continued her work of recalibration. She began to teach workshops about relational care in movements. About how you could be uncompromising in your demands for justice and still build a life that sustains others. People were skeptical at first. How do you center tenderness without diluting urgency? She answered by bringing small exercises into training. Listening circles. Accountability partners. And moments where organizers were taught to ask not only what we must do, but who do we risk missing while we do it? The paradox of her growth is that it came from the same place that had once made her hurtful. An urgency to do things correctly. Now, however, the urgency was applied inward. She began therapy, but not the kind that catalogs outrage. It was the kind that catalogued wounds. She would sit in her notebook and try to trace the ways she used moral invincibility as a way to not be seen. She was slow and bumpy and brave. And sometimes she would watch me and Nora travel for a weekend to Appalachia to see a local maker's fair and like the photo. An apparently small, pixelated approval. I would think of the earlier days and the ease we once had and the ways we constructed narratives about each other that were more performance than history. One winter day, Olivia invited me to a panel she was moderating on sustainable activism. I agreed to go, and Nora came with me. The room was full. Students, organizers, people who'd been in the movement a long time and those new to it. Olivia began by reading an excerpt about how relational practices sustain movements. Mid-speech, She paused and looked at me. Uncertain, intentional, and said, publicly and plainly, I'm learning that the people in my life are not prizes to be won for the rightness of my arguments. They are not props for my moral narrative. They are my people. The pause was a soft one, but it was like a bell. After the panel, in the hallway that smelled of coats and community coffee, she approached with a measured smile. Daniel, she said, I know I hurt you. I know I left you with the feeling of being used as an example of something I was trying to teach. There was honesty in the smallness. I'm sorry, she said. I can't ask you to return what was lost. I only want to be better. To practice the small things I didn't practice before. I told her how I'd felt and what I had found in my life with Nora. She nodded, a sadness washing through her like rain. She said, simply, I regret losing us. There was no grand theatrical plea. There was a human thing, admission. She wanted to be heard. I listened, and in that listening there was an arc completed. Not to a reconciliation but to something like forgiveness. People sometimes imagine regret as dramatic. A sudden, movie-worthy realization. A dash across 50 miles to a roadside confession. But most regret doesn't look like that. It's quiet, domestic, and slow. It is the work of remaking oneself in kitchens where one used to produce op-eds. Where one now reads with the other person on the couch. Learning to ask, do you want tea? Rather than here's the correct framing for what you said yesterday. It is the retrieval of small habits. Calling your partner's mother on her birthday without posting about it. Waiting for the other to speak. Praising without an audience. Olivia's regret took that form. She returned to neighborhoods she'd once lectured to and asked the people there what they needed. Not as a platform but as a friend. She learned to cook for someone without a camera. She donated her time quietly. She practiced smallness until it felt like a muscle. Did it erase what had been? No. But it made future interactions softer, truer. People noticed. She became a different kind of leader, less polished, more human. As for me, I learned that being right is not the same as being loving. I learned that love required active consent. Consent to be seen. Consent to be quiet. Consent to be small. I learned that holding someone up in public while erasing them privately is not progress. I learned to call things by name and to set boundaries when a pattern of diminishment emerged. I also learned forgiveness. I let go of vindictiveness and made room for the fact that people change on different timetables. Years later, Olivia and I would be friends in that steady adult way. A text on a birthday. A message about a lost dog. A donation to a cause she believed in. Sometimes she would send pictures of small dinners she'd cooked for neighbors. Sometimes I would see a post about a policy victory. We met no longer as lovers but as two people who had been remade by the rough hands of time. The women who never doubted me, Naomi and Leah, kept being brilliant friends. Naomi started her own design studio in Brooklyn. And Leah moved into program leadership at a nonprofit that collaborated with my company on civic tech. Nora and I, married now for 5 years, host a Sunday supper that is predictable and private and beautiful in its smallness. Olivia watched all of this. And sometimes I could tell she watched with a sharpness that used to be named something else. But she had started to learn that watching is not the same as participating. Regret is not an instant fix, it is a daily reorientation. She learned to practice the small things. Making a phone call that no one else would see. Apologizing without annotation. Loving without editing. If you want the clickbait again. She said, let's just be friends, and I said, sure, and then we both learned what that small phrase hid. It wasn't the end of a love story. It was the start of 2 parallel educations. One in learning to be loved. The other in learning to love without making people props. I still sometimes open my old junk drawer and find the sticky note that said, Don't forget to call Mom. I smile. I call my mother. I make a cup of tea for Nora without announcement. I answer Olivia's occasional messages with kindness. I do the small things. And I have learned that the thing people mean by never doubting someone is not blind worship but steady faith in the ordinary. The quiet labor of showing up day after day. Exactly the labor that sustains both movements and marriages.